Good evening, everyone. How's the sound on that? Okay. I want to thank you all for joining us here at the International House in the homeroom for Freedom Made in Egypt with Sahar El-Nadi, who is joining us from Cairo. I also want to extend my thanks to the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, particularly Tom McGuire and Alex Barna for everything they've done to put this event together. And of course, I'd like to thank the iHouse for hosting the event. My name is Laith Saoud. I'm pursuing my PhD here in the Department of Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations. I'm also a continuing lecturer in Islamic Studies at DePaul University. As some of you know, I was recently in Egypt with two very dear friends of mine and fellow activists, Ahmed Rihab, who is here, and Yasser Tabara. And it's perhaps inappropriate or maybe even bad luck to start any talk with a little bit of blasphemy, but considering how much Egyptians love Egypt, it borders on the blasphemous, so I figured maybe I could start with my own. Cairo was a religious experience for me. To be there during this time in history, to be there as someone who studies the history of the region and to see history in the making with my own eyes is not something that I can convey or express. It was a pilgrimage for me, as it was for my friends who went along with me. And part of the reason that that's the case is it was inspiring. And what made it so inspiring were the Egyptian people. And when it comes to that inspiration, very few inspired me more than Sahar, who is with us today. What can I say about Sahar? She is brilliant, she's charismatic, and I have forever been attached to and linked to Egypt in concern and intellect and spirituality, in part because of what she's presented Egypt as to me. But let me say a few formal things about her. She's an activist, she's a writer. For years, she has been a consultant and an instructor in communications, particularly cross-cultural communications. She has initiated an endeavor known as Don't Hate, Educate, that facilitates cross-cultural dialogue and interfaith dialogue. And she has also taught at the Women's Leadership Center at the AUC, teaching leadership skills and communication skills. So without further ado, I bring you Sahar El-Nadi. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Laith. I think you've raised everybody's expectations. Now I'm going to take the heat. So we'll see what happens. I hope it works out the way you introduced me. Thank you for being here. It actually feels wonderful to be here with you tonight. To be honest with you, standing in Tahrir Square, chanting, covered in dust and sweats and tears and full of big dreams, I never imagined that I'm going to end up here. So thank you very much for inviting me, and thank you for being here tonight. I begin by bringing you sunshine and freedom fresh from Tahrir Square. I was there a few days before I came here to the US on the 1st of April, which also makes it difficult for me to be far away at such a time when so much is happening in Egypt right now as I speak. So let's hope by the time I get home, I'll still have a place in there. A lot of people would have jumped for the occasion and just took my place. I hope not. I feel privileged that I've been part of making history, obviously. But I also feel the responsibility, the huge responsibility that comes with such a privilege, because when you are part of making history, inevitably, you're part of building the future, whether or not you like it, and that's a huge responsibility. So me and all the Egyptians I left back home are determined to take the challenges head on and emerge winning. So I hope we show you a lot of good news very soon. This talk, Laith talked a lot about me being an expert on communication skills and presentation skills. Well, actually, as soon as I got the invitations for here and Harvard and Georgetown University, it was actually a challenge to my communication skills, because Tahrir can only be experienced. It cannot be told. And what I thought I should be doing is not just telling you a story. I had to bring the story to you. I want you to see what I saw, and I want to share with you the tremendous energy and the overwhelming emotions that I have experienced at Tahrir Square. And that's why a considerable part of my presentation is going to be audiovisual, because I really want you to be in the middle of the action. And if you feel overwhelmed, then I'm going to be happy, because that's exactly how we felt when we were at Tahrir. It was an overwhelming experience. Even when I was there in person, it was an attack on my emotions. It took me a long time until I could, untangle the feelings and thoughts and actually sit and write something about it, or even look at my videos and my pictures. So you can imagine what a feat it was to try to cut a lot of that away in order to fit something into 1 hour, in order to bring you this presentation. So I really hope that by the end of this presentation, you're going to have had a taste and a feel of how it felt to be in the middle of the action. To set the mood, let me try to bring you the first feeling you got at Tahrir as soon as you got there. I would ask you to please stand up, and those of you who speak Arabic, please join me in singing the Egyptian national song from Tahrir Square with 3 million Egyptians. Thank you very much. You probably want to know how I got involved in Tahrir Square. Well, I've always been an activist, but I have an interesting story of how I found myself right in the middle of the action. It's very personal. By the end of 2010, I was going through a very difficult time on the personal level. And the kind of personal time, the problem that would take people to therapists. I decided to self-coach. And because I love creativity and because I believe in education as a heal-all, I decided to create a creative project as my New Year's resolution. And I called it, What Can You Teach Me? In that project, I asked everybody I knew, young, old, women, men, inside Egypt, outside Egypt, to actually teach me something, one skill, to teach me a skill. I started that on the 1st of January, 2011. By the 3rd week of January, I had actually learned 10 new skills. It was amazing. I was taking pictures and videos of myself learning. I was taking notes, and my friends were getting so involved. We were facing a lot of challenges because some of them were outside Egypt, so we had to be really creative on how we were going to deliver those lessons. And my aim was to actually write a book about the experience. Little did I know that before the end of the first month of my project, the biggest lesson would come from my country. I live in a suburb of Cairo called Maadi. That's an affluent, quiet, very well organized part of Cairo. By US standards, it would be a small town. There are 85 million people in Egypt. About 20 million of them live in Cairo. And about 1 million of them live in my town. So that's a lot of people. However, it's a very quiet place. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happens there. Let me show you how that changed in just a few hours. Sobbing for two reasons. First of all, I was torn between going down in the street with those people. These are my friends, my neighbors, everybody I knew since I was a child, out in the street chanting against Mubarak for the very first time in a place that had never seen anything like that. I wanted to be part of it, obviously. At the same time, my journalistic sense was tugging at me, you know. I had to be there taking in that moment. That video is the only one you will see from my town. And I'm happy I did that because now you could share it with me. The other reason I was sobbing is because looking at those faces, you know, those fresh, happy, smiling faces, young, full of dreams and hopes, I knew that some of them will never make it home. And they didn't. My town gave 63 people that night so Egypt could be free. For that, I'm here tonight. The least I could do for their memory and to honor what they did, their precious lives, is to tell the story and to pass on the lesson. So here we go. Tahrir to me was a very powerful experience. The 18 days we experienced there were equivalent to a lifetime of learning. As a trainer, I told you I'm a trainer by profession. To me, the way I saw it was that it was a very intense training camp, you know, when they take you off-site in your organizations and take you away so that you can learn a skill and you go on team building exercises and this kind of thing. Well, actually, in Tahrir, the training camp we went through was very intense because it taught a lot of skills in such a short time. It was totally transformational. It was very powerful. It was hands-on, and it was literally life or death, as you have seen. So you actually had to be resourceful to stay alive, let alone to succeed. One of the things that really amazed me is that, again, as a trainer, I couldn't help being who I am over there. I mean, besides being an Egyptian, my profession, you know, my professional life was actually a large part of what I was saying. As a trainer, I was astonished to see 21st century skills in full action in Tahrir from people who don't even know how to read or write. And so I was looking closely, and that's why in what you're going to be seeing tonight in my videos and my pictures, you'll see me so focused on the people. In the media, you usually got this bird's eye view of the square, like an ocean with drops in it. You had no idea who those people were. But actually, let me start by introducing you to the people, you know, brave women, men, and kids, yes, even children, who have fought tyranny and oppression with civility and peace for the very first time in the history of revolutions, armed only with their faith.
Sometimes you will have the strength to rise.
انا عايز منه ايه؟ لازم يشتغل ويجي بدل لازم يشتغل.
عشان قانون البلدي، عشان خاطر رغيف العيش اللي بالطوابير، ها، عشان خاطر سكن، عشان خاطر ايه؟ عشان خاطر اعيش عيالي في كرامه. طفشت، كنت فاكره الطريق السهل، طلع اصعب طريق الغربه. الغربه كانت من عمري. وضفوا الميدان.
نظفوا الميدان. قولوا نبدا اللي تحت ورقه جيب.
الشهداء مكان حسني مبارك هنا. اموت من اجل مصر. اموت من اجل مصر. جاي مكمل على داي.
كنتاكي بالكاتشب يا اخوانا.
الاجنده لو سمحت.
والله العظيم كنتاكي بالكاتشب.
اجندات مفيش اجندات؟
لا مفيش فيها. الحلو اهو الحلو.
طب الحلو
اهو.
بونبوني بتاع الحكومه.
كلنا ايد واحدة طلبنا حاجة واحدة ارحل ارحل ارحل. كل يقول يا جماعة كلنا ايد واحدة طلبنا حاجة واحدة ارحل 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 ارحل. يسقط حسني مبارك. يسقط حسني مبارك. يسقط حسني مبارك. يسقط حسني مبارك. يسقط حسني. هو يمشي مش هنمشي. طب هو يمشي مش هنمشي. يا جماعة هو يمشي مش هنمشي. طب هو يمشي مش هنمشي. طب هو يمشي مش هنمشي. طب هو يمشي.
Amazed by this show of civility, a French friend of mine wrote me, and I quote, I'm reading what he wrote to me. Soon the world will never mention again the bloody French Revolution as a historical reference, but everybody will remember from now on the very inspiring, ethical, charismatic, emotional, and spiritual Egyptian revolution as a standard for all world revolutions to come. I was very touched when I got that comment. And obviously I see his point, because in just 18 days, Egyptians made such huge leaps in every aspect of life that it's almost unbelievable. For example, how many of you have been in Egypt before? Good. Do you think Egyptians were noted for good organization before 25th January? No. I'm an Egyptian, I love my country, I'm here because of my country, yet I have to admit that, no, we were not noted for good organizations. However, the organization at Tahrir was phenomenal. Although we were totally self-governed, and we came from very different backgrounds, culturally, spiritually, religiously, socially, I couldn't believe what I saw. Let me start by showing you a picture I'm using courtesy of BBC. You can look this up online and it's interactive. When you go online, let me try to do this, then when you look at those labels online and you click them, you actually get a bigger picture of what's in there. This shows you what was happening at Tahrir Square. The volunteers from the protesters patrolled the gates, the entrances to Tahrir. You can see how huge the square is. For example, look at any of the buildings. These are huge buildings, and then try to compare the size of the building to the size of the space to get a feel of how big that is, those of you who haven't been there. So try to imagine that there were people who were volunteering to be at the gates guarding the entrances and helping the army make the place secure. Actually, in the middle of a revolution, the center of the revolution, Tahrir Square, was actually the safest place in Cairo. You could, and you will see that in many pictures to come, you could actually leave your very expensive smartphone to be charged on the sidewalk in a place with 1 million people in it and come back and find it right where you left it. Before the revolution, we went to upscale cafes and you wanted to charge your phone, put in electricity. You had to put it in a little box and take a key with you so that nobody would snatch it, despite the fact that everybody there was affluent and already had a phone like yours. So that was one of the things that happened at Tahrir. It was very safe. People were frisked personally, each one, and your luggage or whatever baggage you had with you was inspected to make sure you didn't have any weapons, because we didn't want to see the ugly scenes we have seen at the first 3 days of the revolution anymore. So the women had a line, the men had a line, and then volunteer women and volunteer men were frisking everyone and checking their luggage for weapons. Because of that, we had started a reception committee, a welcome committee. Their job was to be outside the gates, entertaining you until you got inside, because the waiting line was very long, as each person had to be searched. So those people were singing funny songs and encouraging chants and asking you not to mind that they are keeping you waiting. So they actually set the mood. It became a celebration rather than a revolution. Everybody was singing along, they were taking pictures, they were chatting with each other, getting to know each other in line before they went into Tahrir. As soon as you passed the checkpoint, the security checkpoint, and you were inside, there was a reception committee, an orientation committee for newcomers. If you wanted to ask questions, where to go, what to do here, they would direct you. At the same time, there was a media committee. Believe it or not, there was a TV and radio in Tahrir. We had huge screens showing the international coverage of what was going on. So we were actually watching CNN and Al Jazeera and all sorts of things on huge screens, so people were staying informed. We are actually more informed in Tahrir than at home, because actually you were all the time very updated. The radio, the internal radio, was all the time airing updates and instructions, security instructions, health instructions of how to stay safe in such a huge crowd. There was an education committee, and those people were doing something magnificent. They actually started a nursery, because believe it or not, the women protesters brought their babies, nursing babies. So there was a nursery for the women so that they can spend more time at Tahrir and their kids would be safe. And there was a school, a volunteer school for the kids who missed classes because of the revolution. So the revolutionaries who were teachers set up makeshift classes. There were 6 field clinics. The first 3-4 days, because it was violent and a lot of people were hurt, obviously a lot of medical help was needed. When I say violent, by the way, I want to make clear that I mean the peaceful protesters were attacked by the security forces. The protesters were not violent. So a lot of the very famous doctors in Cairo actually set camp in Tahrir. They moved to Tahrir with their entire teams. And we, all of us, the people in Tahrir and our families, donated medical supplies and equipment. And we had fully equipped clinics, field clinics in there. Until the day I left, before I came here, those clinics were still working, treating anyone for free. That was amazing. There was a supply committee, and that was quite interesting as well, because a lot of people wanted to donate supplies for the people who were staying the night at Tahrir. And so the supply committee would receive the donations and make sure that they distribute them fairly among all the protesters who were setting camp in Tahrir. There was a creative committee. Those people did an amazing job, and they set the mood for this revolution. They set it apart from everybody else. First of all, they invented all the slogans that we will see in the videos, really funny stuff, that is now being picked up in all the other revolutions in the Middle East. They actually organized and set up displays, art displays for the things captured from the thugs, the thugs who came in to attack the protesters. When they were captured, whatever weapons, IDs, their NDP IDs and their police IDs, because sometimes they were police and they were plain clothes. They were taken away from them, and there were, organized displays. So when you went and visited Tahrir, you could take the kids for a go around, and show them, educate them about the culture. This is where we captured the thugs. This is what we got from them, and you will see some of those in the videos as well. One of the most amazing things for me as an educator and as somebody who is so interested in human behavior and psychology, there was a jail in Tahrir for the captured thugs. So when we caught the thugs, they went underground in one of the underground stations, and that was a makeshift jail. How many of you know the Stanford prison experiment? Stanford prison experiment? Okay. It's a psychological experiment whereby some of the students were made to be prison guards and some other students were made, were acting as like a role play. The other students were acting as if they were prisoners. Surprisingly, the experiment had to be stopped because of how violent and aggressive the normal people like you and me, students in a university in Stanford, had become extremely violent as soon as you made them prison guards. This didn't happen in Tahrir. This was amazing. Those thugs were out to get us. They were out to kill us. They were there armed, and they wanted to kill the protesters. When they were captured, they were treated so humanely, to the extent that when somebody was so angry at them and wanted to slap them or shout obscenities, the other protesters would immediately bring them back to their senses by reminding them that this is not the spirit we wanted. We don't care if he is aggressive. We are not thugs like him. We're civilized. So don't hit him, don't shout at him, don't call him names. Just detain him until the army came and took them. And that's what happened. This was an amazing thing as well. So because of all that, Tahrir was very special because the free atmosphere, freedom, brought with it an amazing amount of self-expression. People were alive again. It brought out the best in them. It brought their creativity, it brought their civility. The simplest of Egyptians have found their civilized core suddenly. So you could see, for example, the man in this picture, he's a simple Egyptian, and look how proud and how happy he is because he's free. You can see, it says freedom on his face. I mean, I didn't even have to write the word under the picture. So in this utopia of freedom, people spent entire days learning, teaching, expressing themselves freely, and they didn't fall into the trap that the politicians said that we will fall into, which is total chaos. The politicians said that you have no security now, there's a security vacuum, there are so many people in the place, in a little while you're going to get violent and angry and everything is going to fall apart. Well, actually, this didn't happen. For example, there were millions in Tahrir, and not a single sexual harassment incident had happened or had been reported. I have been in there, I can tell you for sure, none of that happened. Although I was personally harassed several times in Tahrir Square before 25th January, to the extent that I had joined a volunteer effort to combat sexual harassment before that time. I think after the revolution, more or less that is not needed anymore. And that's amazing. I'm sure you've heard of all the sectarian tension between Muslims and Christians in Egypt before the 25th of January. And I'm sure you've heard of the bombing of the church in Alexandria on New Year's Eve. At Tahrir, we were millions of people, Muslims and Christians, and not a single, so much as little friction between one Muslim and one Christian had happened, let alone that in total security vacuum, there wasn't a single church or mosque attacked all over Egypt during the revolution. And so put that fact next to anything you read in the media from then onwards, because what happened in Tahrir is what Egyptians really are, because we didn't have anybody to force us to do otherwise. In fact, what's coming out in the police investigations right now is that the bombing at the church, at the Coptic church in Alexandria at New Year's Eve was actually manufactured to create tension, to draw our attention away from politics. That is eye-opening. A lot of Egyptians are aware of this now, and that's why any kind of tension between Muslims and Christians at this point is being treated in a totally different way than it used to be treated before 25th January. Women are a pivotal force, during the Egyptian revolution. And I was torn between actually making a video especially for the role of women in the Egyptian revolution, or letting you see them in context. I am personally against segregation. There is no such thing, there are no two parallel worlds, one for women and one for men. Actually, we all live in the same world. And women in Tahrir and in Egypt during the revolution and after and before are actually part of the whole scene. They don't exist separately. And so that's why I didn't make a video particularly for the women. What I want you to do is from now on, every video we watch, you pick out the women and find out what was going on, what they were doing, what their role was in the revolution. I can tell you a few stories. I mean, there were lots of amazing stories happening there from women. For example, it was a woman who started the whole thing. I mean, even before the revolution, Isra Abdel Fattah from the 6th April movement was the first woman captured because she asked people to stay at home, not even to go to the streets. And then before the revolution started, it was another woman, Asma Mahfouz, who had started a video blog shaming Egyptian men, telling them, I'm a woman, I'm a young girl, I'm going out there, I'm going to get hurt, and if you're going to sit and watch TV, it's going to be your problem. And I suspect that a lot of men went to the street because of that, shot from Asma Mahfouz. A lot of women were at the forefront of the action right from day one. I think when I showed you the video from my town, you could see how many women were on the street among the people. Many women during the revolution were actually, literally, nose to nose with the notorious security forces. And so a lot of them were among the dead, injured, and tortured up to this day, and they didn't stop. It didn't put them back home. A lot of them brought their children, which was amazing because, mother's instinct is to actually care for her baby, protect him or her, and take them away, out of harm's way. But what they actually did is take their kids there. And that was another amazing thing, that the freedom during the Egyptian revolution had encouraged families, entire families. And when I say family in Egypt, it doesn't mean mom, dad, and the kids. It means extended family. It means cousins and second cousins and third cousins, a whole bunch of people going together, walking long distances because there weren't much transportation to go to Tahrir together. The reason why they did this is something that was an eye-opener for me. Tasting freedom for the first time is a privilege that a lot of us will live and die without having. If you had been born into a free world, you don't have that. I do. When people went to Tahrir for the first time and managed to stand in broad daylight in the middle of the biggest square in Cairo, shouting slogans against the president by name and against the government, and then walking back home, sleeping in their beds without fearing somebody would snatch them out of bed and throw them in a dungeon, and then coming back in the morning for more, they just couldn't believe it. It was unbelievable. So that's why you will see in the videos how happy people were while they were demonstrating. What they actually did is bring the children to learn a life lesson they would have never learned otherwise. It was life-changing. So you'll see a lot of people with kids on their shoulders, and they're actually telling the kids to chant because they wanted them to feel this. They wanted them to have something they didn't have. We didn't have that for 60 years. So a lot of us had been born into a world without that at all. I was in a rally a couple of days ago here in Chicago, and I was actually laughing as soon as we got there because you could just paint a banner or a placard and stand on a sidewalk here any day and say what you want and go home. We had to risk our life for that. And so when you think about it, it was so monumental, so life-changing, so transformational that people actually brought their families to experience that. How does that relate to the role of women? Hadn't it been for the women encouraging the family, letting the dad take the kids along, pushing the man to go, not pulling him back, no, please don't go there because you're going to get hurt. It wasn't that way. It was the other way around. Please go because we need that. So she either went with him or sent the kids with him, or at least didn't pull him back. Another role of women that is generally overlooked in the media here and in Egypt and everywhere is online. Most of the women, how many women have you seen in CNN and BBC and so on talking about the Egyptian revolution? A lot. How many women have been tweeting about Egypt if you're using Twitter? They were tweeting, they were Facebooking, they were starting causes on Facebook, they were rallying opinion, they were educating people. So even those who couldn't personally be there were being monumentally, very effective in mobilizing people to go to Tahrir Square and in educating them about what was going on. Personally, this was my role for the first 3 days of the revolution while we had internet, because, we got disconnected. So as soon as we got disconnected, I was down there. So they actually did us a great favor by disconnecting the internet, because then we got to experience something big. For so long, we, the women of the Middle East, have been trying to convince the world that we have a mind, that we have a voice, that we have a choice. It didn't work. I think as soon as we could go down to Tahrir Square, we could easily show the world what we were made of. Nobody could refute the fact that you saw a lot of women doing amazing things over there. So definitely, I dare say that without the role of women in the Egyptian revolution, things wouldn't have been the same as they are today. So this was one really pivotal element in the success of the Egyptian revolution. One more element is the creativity. Try to imagine people are being shot at, killed, and they are smiling, they're laughing, they're making cracking jokes, they're inventing one-liners, and they are literally, combating bullets with jokes, with humor. This was another major element in the success of the Egyptian revolution, because it set the mood for something that was unheard of before. Try to imagine this. In Egypt, we had a huge gap between the rich and the poor. The only thing we had in common before 25th January was the Egyptian sense of humor, and that was killed under oppression. Tahrir saw the rebirth of that. And it was amazing what a joke could do. When two people could laugh at the same thing, when you take a concept or a very deep kind of information, even scary or very serious, and then you condense it, and then you turn it into a joke that could easily be understood by everybody, that could be carried around, that could be shared on Facebook, that could be memorized. People won't forget it. It's a piece of information, but actually it's funny. When you do that, and when two people could laugh at it, all the barriers between them fall. They become one. And that's what the joking did, the light spirit, the creativity and the humor did to the Egyptians. It actually brought them closer. It reminded them that they had that in common. So let me show you a video with a lot of examples of how creative and funny the Egyptians were, and how that was effective in conveying even very harsh realities, such as, for example, what rubber bullets could do to your body. How could you do that in a funny way? Let's see.
سوزي تاخد 5 مليار بس
انت فقير.
والله فقير. انا بقى طالب وبتنحى عن هذا الكلام. انا بقى طالب البيت الابيض يعيد التحقيق في تقسيم هذه التركه.
كنتاكي يا جماعه، حد ما خدش وجبات كنتاكي ميدان التحرير يا جماعه، اللي ما خدش يقرب ياخد وجبات كنتاكي.
وضعوا الميدان.
قولوا نبدا اللي تحت ورقه كده.
الشهداء مكان حسني مبارك هنا. اموت من اجل مصر. اموت من اجل مصر. جاي وجاي مكمل على جاي.
كنتاكي بالكاتشب يا اخوانا.
الاجنده لو سمحت.
والله العظيم كنتاكي بالكاتشب.
اجندات مفيش اجندات.
لا مفيش فيها. الحلو اهو الحلو.
بالحلو
الحلو اهو.
بونبوني بتاع الحكومه.
كلنا ايد واحده
يسقط حسني مبارك يسقط يسقط حسني مبارك يسقط يسقط حسني مبارك يسقط يسقط حسني مبارك يسقط يسقط حسني هو يمشي مش هنمشي طب هو يمشي مش هنمشي يا جماعة هو يمشي مش هنمشي طب هو يمشي مش هنمشي طب هو يمشي مش هنمشي طب هو يمشي مش هنمشي كلنا ايد واحدة طلبنا حاجة واحدة ارحل 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 كلنا ايد واحدة طلبنا حاجة واحدة ارحل 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 كلنا ايد واحدة طلبنا حاجة واحدة ارحل 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 ارحل
You've just been at Tahrir for a day. I could see you laughing, so that's the effect it had on us. Try to imagine seeing this face to face. Like, this is just a video, but if you had been there in person, it felt amazing. So you were actually happy with your freedom, you were happy with meeting such high spirits, and you were thinking the entire time. You were feeling, you were thinking, you were looking, you were learning, you were sharing with other human beings, connecting. Actually, this experience was so transformational that it had changed one of the big, characteristics of the Egyptian people for the past few years. If you had put, before 25th January, if you had put a piece of paper and a pen in front of a random Egyptian, you would most certainly get one of two responses with an apologetic smile. Sorry, bad handwriting, or sorry, bad drawing skills. You've just witnessed the transformation. People were just grabbing at anything they could draw or write on, using discarded cardboard, pieces of paper, pieces of notebooks, and just writing whatever, drawing whatever. And they were standing right there for days, every day, for several hours, just sharing their views with the world. Standing in the same spot. If you went 2-3 days in a row, you'd find the same person going around Tahrir with a sign. Why did they do that? I kept asking myself, why are they doing this? It must be so amazing that you finally have a voice, and that your voice counts, and that you have an opportunity to share with other people, that so many people were willing to be there just to do that, just to speak up and enjoy it and smile and laugh about it. So it was really amazing, the feeling that it brought with it. One of the things that this did to us was bringing back our sense of identity. Those of you who have been in Egypt in the past 5 years would notice that Egyptians were very bitter whenever Egypt was mentioned. They were sad, they were bitter, they were actually depressed. I mean, literally, clinically depressed. We were having one of the highest levels. It was skyrocketing of clinical depression in Egypt in the past 5 years. Suddenly, look at the smile, look at the picture, look how big the smile is. This is the night that Mubarak stepped down. And the sign on his car says, I'm Egyptian. We had never had that before. I had never worn my national flag like this all over the place before. I love my country, obviously, and I respect my flag, but it hadn't been that way. I've never seen so many smiles for such a long time. I've never seen flags everywhere. Over here, you have the American flag all over the place. We didn't have that in Egypt. We only had flags all over the place when we had a soccer match involving the national team. That's all we could, that's what the flag was for. This is when you saw the kids, with the face paint. Other than that, we didn't really belong to that flag. When we went to Tahrir, we lost every other affiliation except this flag. Muslim, Christian, man, woman, rich, poor, it didn't matter. You came from the country, you came from an affluent place, it didn't matter. You were Egyptian, and you were very proud of it. And this, again, was something that I thought about a lot after being in Tahrir. What this did, the sense of belonging, the sense of ownership of our country, resulted in something so amazing, which is sudden, out of nowhere, social responsibility. The night that Mubarak stepped down, We were definitely, having fun and having a big party. It was actually the biggest street party I've ever seen. 85 million people, 85 million happy people celebrating in the street all night. When that happens elsewhere, you expect to, when you go to the streets in the morning, you could see a party was there. Like you would have all sorts of litter and discarded stuff from the previous night and so on. Did you ever see people in the middle of a celebration decide to go back to Tahrir to clean it up the next day? That's what we did. I have no idea where that idea came from, but it was all over the place. It was all over Cairo, and people went in the thousands the following day. I was there to clean up Tahrir. So let's take a look. The biggest lesson we have learned during the revolution is, as my fellow revolutionary Wael Ghunaim of Google put it in his TED Talk, the power of the people is much stronger than the people in power. And I think you could see very, very clearly from what we have shared so far. For decades, Egyptians suffered the lack of a national project and the sharp decline of every national product that Egypt used to offer to the world. In just 2 weeks, freedom, the Egyptian style, has become both the national project and the national product for export, not only to the Middle East, but I dare say globally. I think you already know what's happening in Libya, Syria, and Yemen, to list a few of the countries who are picking the vibe from Egypt. I'm wondering if you already know that we have reached Wisconsin and London. This is 2 weeks ago from Trafalgar Square, or from London, China, and Korea. Actually, there are floating balloons with DVDs in them with information about the Egyptian revolution to help their fellow Koreans to revolt. And it seems to be working. We've even reached Texas and Salt Lake City. And even this. This is a US site, by the way. This is not an Egyptian site. And so, it seems to me that this is what we're up to. We are more or less creating a new standard, a new global standard for freedom. Being an Egyptian, or like an Egyptian, pre-25th January was an insult. Somehow we've managed to turn it into an honor that the entire world is looking up to, suddenly. I'm very proud to be part of that. And I think it's because certain core values were shown to the world in action that resonated with every civilized human being across the globe. Nonviolence, coexistence between religions, respect to women, and peace. Everybody understands those values, and everybody saw those in action during the Egyptian revolution. For us to be able to sustain that inspiration, we need an exceptional system for education in Egypt for the time being, and that is a good investment, not just for us, but for the world. Because if we are out to inspire the world, we had better do it right. Any educational system that comes into Egypt internationally has got to be localized. You've seen how proud the Egyptians have become of their heritage, of their local culture and their local language. Anything that doesn't take that into consideration is not going to work from now on. So what we do need is to actually create a totally new educational system for the Egyptians, hopefully with the help of the international community and everybody who could help creating that for the good of the international community. Obviously, we are influencing a lot of people around us. And this education system, in my opinion, should be worthy of these people.
نزلت وقلت انا مش راجع وكتبت بدمي في كل شارع سمعنا اللي ما كانش سامع واتكسرت كل الموانع سلاحنا كان احلامنا وبكره Oh,
المسيح قلبوا خريف ربيع وحققوا المعجزة صحوا القتيل من أجل اقتلني أجري ما هيعيد دولة الإسلام بكتب بدمي حياة تانية لأوطاني دمي تولى الربيع الاثنين بلون أخضر وببتسم من تعدي ولا أحزان
كل شارع في بلادي صوت الحرية بينادي.
I'm confident that soon the world will watch the birth of the Egyptian model of development, worthy of the people that about whom President Obama said Egyptians have inspired us all. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm ready to take your questions.
Do you mind before we start the Q&A? Excuse me, sir. Thanks for the presentation. Before we start the Q&A, if you could state your name and who you're affiliated with, and in addition, before you leave, if you would like to register your email address with Sahar so you can maintain communications with her, you can do that before you go. But please state your name and your affiliation.
Okay, questions? They're overwhelmed. Wonderful. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Andrew Alger. I'm a graduate student at the Center for Middle Eastern Studies, and I remember fondly going down to Chicago in our little solidarity protest, and so this is a marvelous video, and thank you very much for your talk.
Thank you, Andrew.
My question concerns the large number of what I'm calling, I guess, popular press materials that have appeared in and around Tahrir Square during and since the revolution.
Mm-hmm.
I'm involved with a project to translate these documents, and they're now posted online. And I mean,
I'm sorry, I don't follow you. What kind of documents?
People on the streets passing out ideas, new party platforms coming out. I mean, even some children putting together documents for their own sort of parties. It's
Yes.
really quite amazing. It speaks, I think, to your education elements here. I'm wondering if you can comment on what role these presses are having, and if you've seen them yourself, any sort of information you can add about new literature that that attests to Egyptians' ideas. I mean, this is called the Twitter revolution and the Facebook revolution in the U.S. But Twitter and Facebook are limited to like 190 characters. How can you express complex thoughts in 190 characters?
Well, actually, on Facebook, it wasn't the only platform where people communicated, but it definitely played a huge role. Because you could write notes, you could pass on links, you could write comments, you could communicate in different ways. So the printed material that was being passed around Tahrir would have served those who were not connected electronically. And one of the amazing things is that suddenly the Egyptians who had the means to technology, who had access to technology such as smartphones and Twitter and Facebook and satellite channels, were eager to share what they had learned with their fellow Egyptians in any way possible. So maybe the literature you've seen is part of that as well. And actually, right now, this has turned into a nationwide campaign to raise awareness. A lot of my friends are now traveling across Egypt. Suddenly, I mean, it might sound a bit funny, but suddenly we started realizing that Egypt is not only Cairo and Alexandria. And we really wanted to reach out to our, less privileged brothers and sisters. So a lot of the people I know are right now organizing all sorts of campaigns to go and educate. And if it takes that you print what you are circling around on Facebook and Twitter in such a way, as I just said, localization, even within the same culture, is a very important element. Talking to people in a language they would understand. So if even you had to print what you were talking about into a paper to show it to somebody who didn't have the means to technology, that's what happened. You're welcome. Questions? Yes?
Hi, my name is Sean Lent. I'm a fellow with the United Nations Alliance of Civilization,
Great.
exchange program. And I guess I wondered if you could give sort of an update on this week. I have a couple of friends who are bloggers with mixed messages about breaking curfew, not breaking curfew, all is lost.
What's happening this week? Okay. Yes, I get you. You're talking about the past weekend in particular, right? Yeah. Okay. I saw this coming. I made a lot of prayers before I came here that I don't get this question, Sharon. Anyway, obviously, I've been in the United States since the 1st of April, so I am as good as any of you in what's going on in Tahrir. I'm just looking at the media just like you. I haven't been there, I don't know. I prefer to talk about things that I have seen myself, that I've been part of myself. So what I can explain to you from what I've been reading from my friends on Facebook and those who were there and from talking to them and so on until I get home, and maybe we can talk about that later, is the fact that we are at the stage now. You remember the analogy I used at the very beginning of my talk, the training camp. Any of you had been in a training camp before I go further? A big training course, like something, with skills, whatever. What happens, boot camp. I don't want to say that, Middle Eastern terrorist girl standing there talking about boot camps. And I'm oppressed, as you can see, so. Right, what I can tell you is that when you're in the middle of a training course or a training camp, things are perfect, it's perfect conditions, it's a utopia, and that's what we had in Tahrir. You were focused towards one thing, you were working very hard at it, and that's why it works, because everybody else wants it to work. The real test comes after you finish, and when you go out of that training camp and take the ideas you've learned there, try to put them, to apply them in real life. Those of you who had been in a training course know that this becomes really difficult as soon as it becomes something you want to apply every day. And this is the stage we are in right now in Egypt. There will be trial and error. There will be mistakes. We're only human. We're not angels. I think we've raised the expectations immensely, with the kind of civility that was shown during the Egyptian revolution. But the fact is, we are just people, like everybody else. We make mistakes. And the only way we will learn and do perfect is by making mistakes, learning from them, and practicing. So while some of the people you're talking to and some of my friends are optimistic, and as you say, they say all is lost, everything is bad, I actually see the good side. I see that suddenly so many millions of people have gone out and voted during the referendum I just showed you. The biggest turnout ever in the history of Egypt. The number of voters in Egypt is about 45 million people to 48 million people estimate. Many of those are outside Egypt and they're not allowed to vote. So when you count the people who were inside Egypt, it's less than that. And the turnout for the voting was 20 million people, almost. That's huge. The last number, in the previous so-called elections, we had about 5 million people. So, for example, this is a huge indication. Another huge indication is how many political parties, as Andrew was saying, are sprouting out of nowhere, all over the place. How many presidential candidates have declared that they formally are running for presidency. I think these things outshine the violence, the bit of action that we have been witnessing over the weekend in Tahrir Square. This was bound to happen, and I'm happy it took this long for something like that to show its face. I mean, so I'm not pessimistic at all. I'm actually very hopeful that this will be dealt with the way we had dealt with a lot of other, bigger challenges during the revolution. Yes, please.
You mentioned, you mentioned how you see this as an inspiration for future activities around the world. I was wondering if there's a way in which you noticed that Egyptians were inspired by previous revolutions, going back to the Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia through...
That's a bit too far away. We were definitely inspired by the Tunisians. I remember clearly that only maybe 10 days, 12 days before the Egyptian revolution, I was one of the people who passed around a video of the police force in Tunisia, asking forgiveness. They had their own march in Tunis, and they were asking the nation to forgive them the brutality and to accept them again in the mainstream life. And I was passing that along to my friends in Egypt and making jokes about it. When will we see something like that in Egypt? Little did I know that it was less than a month away. I mean, I really didn't know that this was going to be 1 month away. So yes, we were inspired by the Tunisian revolution, and I'm very happy that we got our football differences with them. Actually, there's a beautiful song that just came out from Egyptians and Tunisians together about the revolution on both countries, where they say we want to extend hands and we want to be friends and things like that. But other revolutions from the world, such as the Velvet Revolution or the Orange Revolution or whatever it is, I'd be pushing it if I said that Egyptians were inspired by that, because we need to remember that we were not at all interested in politics. We had actually been deterred thinking or feeling anything political or having any political aspirations, myself included. So it wasn't, things that happened elsewhere in the world to us was just something you watched on the news. It didn't mean that you had to, you were hoping you'll be part of it. It was so far away. You felt, because of the environment and because of the oppression, you felt it was so far away from you that it's like watching a movie. Oh, wow, they are doing a great job, good luck, and that's it, nothing else. But Tunisia was different, because they are close, and because we could see that such a tiny country made such a huge progress in a short time. And we're very proud, by the way, that we still hold the record, 18 days. Nobody had broken that record yet. The question is basically, during the revolution, the women had a big role, but after the revolution, we can see that role diminishing. Again, the analogy with the training course, nothing comes on a platter. In a revolution, you have to fight for it. You have to go out there and fight for it. You have to stand up for yourself. You have to go and ask for it, demand it. Freedom, any freedom, is never given voluntarily by the oppressor. It has to be demanded by the oppressed. Similarly, rights are not given to you except when you have a standard, a stable state. We're at a stage right now where things are up in the air for the grabs. You really have to work hard for them. So the women who were at Tahrir risking their lives and doing all sorts of wonderful things have to ask themselves, why are they out of the scene right now? They have to go out and grab it, in my opinion. That's what I'm doing. That's why I'm here. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Dina. I'm also an Egyptian. I was lucky enough to go back to Egypt during the revolution and just came back like 10 days before you.
Bravo, Edin.
I'm a student here at the University of Chicago. Just to comment on about the women, I think representation, like there's a woman presidential candidate, and I'm part of an emailing list where women are working their butts off. They're like doing all sorts of things, not necessarily that I agree with them being segregated, as you were saying, in their efforts and whatnot. But no, I also attended many lectures when I was in Egypt that were led by women. They weren't talking about women's rights and the individuality, how we need to stick together as women, which is, I thought, was the better approach. They're just doing. They're proving their existence by doing, and they were leading the discussion about what should be done next and their personal experience in Tahrir and so on and so forth. So I do think that women are, compared to the difference between the pre and after, it is a significant jump.
It is.
And it's and it's still, you can't say women after their evolution disappeared.
I agree. Thank you, Dina. And I would use the same argument to address the issue of sectarian tension, religious tension between Muslims and Christians. Now that we have found out that we were being played by the previous regime against each other to create tension manufactured, it would be stupid of us to succumb again to this kind of pressure. When I was in Tahrir, I witnessed Muslims and Christians praying together. And there was a religious committee actually at Tahrir organizing common prayers. I personally have attended Sunday Mass, for example. And when the priest was quoting from the Bible, all of us were standing next to each other. You couldn't tell who's Muslim, who's Christian. And everybody was saying Amen after him. And when it came time for the Imam on Friday to take over, before the Friday prayer, there were chants from the church choir from the morning till noon. And everybody was sitting together listening and chanting along. And then there came the Imam. For the first time in my life, I hear an imam on Friday prayer sermon in a khutbah address the attendees as dear fellow Egyptians, both Muslims and Christians. And when it was time for us to pray, Muslim prayer involves kneeling, so our Christian brothers and sisters formed a human wall around us, holding hands to protect us from the throngs. When it came time for them to pray, we, the Muslims, walked around. As you have seen, the square is really huge. So we have walked around to the far ends of the square and asked the people to keep it down because there are people praying in there. And everybody kept the chanting and the slogans down until Mass was finished. So those of us who have tried these feelings and who have been part of this have a huge responsibility to carry out, this experience, to pass on the learning to the rest of the Egyptians who haven't had the privilege. Actually, it was a woman who had asked me to do this, a woman from a village, a small village. She was face-veiled. She came from a small village outside Cairo. She was asking me directions inside Tahrir Square, and I was asking her, who's with you? How can I help you? And she said, I don't have anybody here, and this is my first time here. Where are you from? She said, I'm from a village near Fayoum. How did you come here? She said, I just got on 3 transportations to be able to come here. It's my first time outside the village. And I was amazed. I was like, why? Why did you do this? And she said, because I had to be here. I just had to be here. And then a few days after, I met the same woman. She recognized me, obviously. I couldn't see her face, so she recognized me. And it was the last day we were leaving Tahrir, the day we were cleaning up. And she said, I want to give you, a message. I want you to carry that message back home, wherever you're from. Teach people what we have learned here, because this is what I'm taking back to my village. And I was so touched. I wanted to take her on video, and she refused. So I promised that I was going to take the lesson back to where I came from, and I'm actually giving it back to you as well right now. So what I'm getting at is that people who have tried these transformational experiences have a responsibility to, re-educate everybody else they get in touch with. And those who feel that there are rights that they need to practice, that there are things they need to have that they don't have a responsibility to go out there and fight for them. It's no longer we're waiting for somebody to lead so we can follow them. The lack of leadership or the lack of a leader in the Egyptian revolution does not mean the lack of leadership, because each one of us was an effective leader. And this should not be lost. Women and men included. I don't like to talk about women's issues and men's issues. I like to talk about the issue at large. So all of us have equal responsibilities because all of us have equal rights. Yes, please.
My name is Muhammad Isa. I teach Arabic at this university. What is it? Just continuing the same thought about education. I know you mentioned something that you were going outside Cairo to educate people. And I know of another small group of people in Egypt recruiting each other to go and educate people on different issues. Do you know any other arranged or systematic formation of groups to go really, actually? The biggest problem, as I see it, is educating people. People vote without knowing, and they want to go and vote, but anybody can sway them this way or this way because of lack of information. And the young, wonderful youth who did that in Tahrir Square, I think the continuation of the message does not have to be from a high political office or...
I totally agree with you.
It really, do you know of any organized way?
There are a lot of... Yes, there are a lot of youth groups now that are forming alliances together to be able to have enough resources to mobilize and raise awareness. And most of them exist on Facebook, so those of you on Facebook can search them out, and I can point you. How you can help them from here is largely up to you. At the stage we are in right now, it's a very flexible, mobile stage where you could just find a niche for yourself and go. So as soon as you scan the market and see what's going on, then you can figure out how you can help with education, with structured curriculum, with training courses, maybe with helping them on the ground, with donating to their causes, whatever. I mean, the sky's the limit. There's so much work to be done, because I agree with you that people go to vote and they're uneducated. And when I say uneducated, I mean they don't know politics. They need an awareness, all of us, I mean, myself included. We needed a lot of work to orient us politically. And so a lot of work can be done in that direction, and it would be great to reconnect Egyptians abroad and Egyptian Americans and Egyptian Europeans to the people back home and to exchange experiences. Yes.
Hi. First of all, it's so nice for you. It's such an honor for me to be here. My name is Amina Wahid. I'm an employee at DePaul University. So it's not any new news, actually, that the old regime, Mubarak's regime, was largely funded and supported by the U.S. administrations throughout the years. Average Egyptians knew this, which is why we had signs that said that.
You could see in the video some signs that said that, yeah, U.S. puppet. Good question. The question is, for those who couldn't hear it, is where the Egyptians want to see the foreign policy in Egypt going, whether or not they want to still be affiliated with the United States. Is that your question? Did I get you right?
Well, I mean, clearly, from what I know, Egyptians want to still be affiliated with the United States, from conversations I've had, but I guess what maybe foreign policy changes that they want to see, or on sort of that level.
Okay, at the time we're in right now, again, let me remind you, I'm not an expert. I'm not a political expert, so I'm talking as an average Egyptian right now. My educated guess is that a revolution is all about change. Revolution means change. However, at the same time, the government in Egypt, the current government, has declared that they respect all their international treaties, including those with Israel, with the United States, with all the other countries that we had any kind of cooperation with. But whether or not that would continue along the same lines that were there before, this remains to be seen, because as I said, we are at a very critical transformational change. There are going to be a lot of political changes happening, and I think this question should be asked to the other side. The question should be asked to the world how it wants to reconnect with Egypt from now on, because a lot of people, a lot of countries were connecting with Egypt via Mubarak as a person. One of the main problems of a dictatorship is that you cease to see the country and you just see a man. And whether or not that man is good or bad, you form your ideas and your alliances and your communication cooperation through that one man. This doesn't exist anymore. The government minds what the people say. You can see whenever we decide to go to Tahrir on a Friday, we start getting the concessions on Thursday. So, and the people realize that. The people realize that they are strong and that their strength is big enough to pressure the government and to instigate changes in internal politics. And so there's no reason why they shouldn't think it should change foreign policy as well. And so, like you, I'm keeping an eye on that. This is very important for me as well. But I also want to see this issue as a dialogue between the two sides of the issue, the rest of the world and Egypt, rather than put all the responsibility on the shoulder of Egyptians and the Egyptian government on how they want to treat the rest of the world. I would rather see the rest of the world wondering how Egypt should be treated from now on. Yes, please.
Ahmed Rahab, I'm the Executive Director of the Council on American Islamic Relations in Chicago, and proud to have participated in the Tahrir Revolution. With 12 million people taking the streets at one point in time from all factions of Egypt against a brutal, entrenched regime, so many things could have gone wrong but didn't. And looking back, we take things for granted, but really it was a revolution that succeeded against all odds. So my question is, what are some of the traits that are unique to Egyptians or to Arab culture or whatever else? Because we hear about so many stereotypes. Exactly. What are some of the positive traits that you feel contributed to this unique success of people coming together at a time where they could have been divided or so much could have gone wrong in this revolution?
Thank you for this question, because it's quite interesting, and I think there are a lot of researchers in the room, and I think this could spark a lot of work and cooperation between among people in this room and outside this room. The Egyptian character has changed a lot in the past month or so, or 2 months since the Egyptian revolution. Basically, some of the traits of the Egyptians have shown themselves again after they had been killed. For example, the sense of humor and the creativity. Those of you who had been in Egypt recently remember the visual ugliness. I do. I teach creativity. So when I drive around the streets and I look at the buildings, they are horrible. Something needs to be done about that. And suddenly there were all those murals and street art and decorations all over the place, which tells you that the sense of creativity is reviving. You saw how the sense of humor and the tongue-in-cheek kind of joking had been revived as well. But also resilience is one of the traits that we had forgotten we possessed. I personally am guilty of accusing the Egyptians of being short-sighted and short-breathed. pre-25th January. I thought that they will never focus long enough, that they didn't have enough energy to carry something like that through, but they did. Organization, I'm very proud that suddenly we had organized something ourselves and it worked perfectly. A sense of national pride and attachment to the Middle Eastern culture at large, not just the Egyptian culture. Suddenly the Egyptians now are interested in the issues all over the Middle East. They're walking in marches to support Iraq, Syria, Palestine, all sorts of other revolutions. This didn't exist on a large scale before. The family, values that were so, the hallmark of Egypt previously, and that have been under attack, under oppression, have suddenly come back again. People are so attached to all the circles that that surround a human being. They're attached to their small family, and they're attached to their extended family, and they think of Egypt as a huge family. And so when I was traveling, for example, coming here, every time I met an Egyptian anywhere, I was taken care of. I mean, I was taken care of here, obviously, in Chicago. The people are amazing. I love your town. But also in the airports, wherever, suddenly people want to be together. They want to stick together. They want to help each other. All of these values, I think, helped a lot. In Tahrir, I think we saw people share food. They brought food from home. Every time we came from home, each of us brought a couple of bags with sandwiches in them, falafel and stuff, and just gave them away. When it was time to clean up, you saw in the video that people were giving away detergents and disinfectants and all sorts of things. This is coming back to us, and I'm really happy that to see those values coming back to life again. I hope I answered your question. Thank you.
With regards to your assertion of this example as a kind of a blueprint for movements for representative government or revolutions in the future, I'd like you to comment a little bit more on the role of the army, because the army,
The role of the army? Yes.
Clearly, I mean, the army, stood aside and helped you provide security. And,
exactly.
So that's the one lesson from that is, you kind of try to bring the army over at least somewhat so that at least they stand aside.
Okay.
But I mean, wouldn't that decrease the generality of the blueprint? Because there are certainly places, for instance, like Syria or Saudi Arabia, where it's much less likely that they can get the army to go over.
Are we running? Yeah. Okay. We're running out of time, so this is going to be the last question. The role of the army in the Egyptian revolution is pivotal. I agree with you. Without their support and protection, I don't think I would have been able to go to Tahrir, because it was quite dangerous before that when it was us against the police. And so yes, I agree with you that this is a special circumstance, and that without them we couldn't have made it. And whether or not this could be duplicated in other countries where the army is actually going to be with the state against the people, I also agree with you that this might be, actually a factor on the other hand of the scale in other circumstances. However, it worked for us, so other people will have to come up with their creative solutions. I don't know. Yeah, I hope so. One last question. One last question. Yes, please. The question is, what is an initiative that Egyptian Americans can start in Egypt as an initiative that doesn't already exist that would be beneficial for both Egyptian Americans and Egyptians back home? For Egypt, something for Egypt that could be contributed to by Egyptian Americans. In my opinion, two things you can do that could be very helpful. One of them is creating some kind of obviously educational initiatives. When I say education, I mean at the school level and I mean at the public level, from all different directions. As we have seen in the videos, illiteracy was not a problem because you could see that people who couldn't read and write could still express themselves. And you could see that you could reach people using creativity, which opens a huge door, for education in different ways. It also means that the lack of political awareness worked for, rather than against the Egyptian people until now, because they weren't already polluted by bad politics. And so something you could do is either create educational initiatives for cooperation or political awareness in a creative, simple, very simplified way that would reach out to Egyptians all over Egypt, not just in Cairo and Alexandria, at a grassroots level. Thank you very much for being here. I really appreciate it. I'm going to be here for a while we pack and everything, so if you needed to talk to me, feel free to get my email address and write me. And I hope you had left your email address outside if you wanted to get a link to the videos you have seen here. Appreciate it. I hope to see you at Tahrir Square sometime.